Joe, and I just completed my latest custom action figure, this classic Poison Ivy. Now there have been a lot of Poison Ivy figures by different manufacturers over the years, but as far as I know, no one has made a classic, silver, or bronze age version of Poison Ivy. Just like the 90s Jim Lee era X-Men, that was the first version that I was exposed to as a kid reading comics, and I imprinted on that. Every time I think about Poison Ivy, an image of the Silver or Bronze Age version pops up in my head. So now let's take a look at my new custom Poison Ivy figure. Cheers. Poison Ivy was created by Robert Kanier and Sheldon Moldoff and made her first appearance in Batman 181 in June 1966. The post-crisis, pre-New 52 origin for Poison Ivy is my preferred origin story for the character. Pamela Isley is a brilliant botanist who goes to study advanced botanical biochemistry under Jason Woodrue, who would later become the supervillain known as the Floronic Man. Woodrue seduces Pamela and begins experimenting by injecting her with plant-based poisons and toxins, which transform her body and drive her insane. Woodrue abandons Pamela when he flees from the authorities after almost killing her. Then Pamela moves to Gotham City and begins her criminal career as Poison Ivy. The toxins in her bloodstream make Poison Ivy's touch deadly, while simultaneously making her immune to virtually all types of poisons, including Joker venom. Ivy's body naturally produces powerful pheromones that make people around her susceptible to mind control. However, exceptionally strong-willed people, like Batman for instance, have been able to resist her. Also, Poison Ivy can mentally control all forms of plant life on a molecular level, and frequently uses plant life in her vicinity to attack and capture her enemies. If you're interested in checking out some comics with Poison Ivy, I would suggest first picking up this Batman Arkham Poison Ivy trade paperback, which collects Poison Ivy stories from her first appearance all the way up to the New 52. This is relatively inexpensive and easily obtained. This trade paperback contains some of my personal favorite Poison Ivy stories, including a two-part story called Hot House from Legends of the Dark Knight, a one-shot comic from 1997 that was intended to capitalize on Ivy appearing in the Batman and Robin movie. Now the movie sucked, but the comic's good, I promise. And the 1995 Year 1 annual from Shadow of the Bat, which is a story about Batman's first encounter with Poison Ivy. Poison Ivy was also prominently featured in Batman Hush, which is super popular, but outside of the artwork, I've never really cared for it. It's presented like it's some big mystery, but it reminds me of every episode of Scooby-Doo. Poison Ivy has teamed up with Harley Quinn numerous times, and she's a member of the Gotham City Sirens, which came out during a time when I wasn't really reading comics, so I don't know very much about it, but it is on my list of stuff to read. First off, I'd like to give a shout out to Botef for inspiring this custom. I'm a member of the Toy Arc forums, and another member there who goes by Botef posted some photos of his custom Kit Bash Poison Ivy figure. I didn't flat out ask him, but I believe he made his with the head from this Marvel Legends Retro Black Widow, the chest or upper torso from this Marvel Legends Dormammu Wave Enchantress, and from the diaphragm joint down, the Marvel Legends Warlock Wave Polaris. So I reached out to Botef on Toy Arc, and he was very friendly and gracious. He's a really talented customizer and diorama builder. I encourage you to check him out on Instagram at LoWanBing. So here's what you'd need if you want to make a custom Kit Bash Poison Ivy figure for your collection. Now when the Marvel Legends Retro line first came out, this Black Widow figure was one of the harder ones to find, but they eventually met demand for them. And a lot of Target stores, in my area at least, have restocked these figures, and this Black Widow is readily available now. This Enchantress figure was one of the peg warmers from the Doctor Strange theme Dormammu Build-A-Figure wave. In fact, I bought mine on clearance for $7 to go with my Thor collection. But that was months ago, and I haven't seen this Enchantress figure at any local retailers for quite some time. However, I imagine she's still readily available on Amazon or other online retailers. Or you can do what I did and just use the Polaris figure from the neck down. Polaris was one of the peg warmers from the Warlock wave, which a lot of Walmart stores have recently restocked, so she's fairly easy to get a hold of now. Now if you're not real confident with painting, or you just don't want to take the time to do it, all you'd really have to do is swap the Polaris head for this Black Widow head, remove the cape and these forearm guards, and remove the flesh tone paint from the sides of the Polaris figure's abdomen. That would give you a pretty solid looking Poison Ivy figure with a more conservative neckline. But I didn't want my custom Poison Ivy to have a conservative neckline. And the chest or upper torso of the Polaris figure was cast in this dark green colored plastic. So I gave my custom shoulder straps so I wouldn't have to worry about paint rub when I moved her arms around. The chest on the Polaris figure was sculpted to look like fabric stretched across her boobs, which I couldn't just paint over to give Poison Ivy a low-cut top, or else it would look weird. So I dremeled down in between her boobs and sculpted some cleavage for her out of Milliput epoxy. This was my last custom action figure. This is Emma Frost from the X-Men comics. And I sculpted bigger boobs on her as well. My wife gave me a real hard time about it, because maybe I took it a little too far. So I tried to rein it in on this custom Poison Ivy figure, and I'm pretty happy with the way she turned out. The first thing I did was remove the flesh tone paint from the sides of her abdomen. Then I used Milliput epoxy to fill in the gaps in her legs where that ugly thigh swivel joint was. I sculpted her boot cuffs and the serrated fins on the sides of her calves. I modeled her boots after the way they looked in Batman the Animated Series, except I added an extra scallop. When the epoxy was cured, I sanded down all the sculpted parts. After that, I cut up the leafy, vine accessories that came with this Matty Collector exclusive Poison Ivy figure. I cut them into short sections and started gluing them to the sides of my custom Poison Ivy figure's legs. I dremeled down the fabric, sculpted in between her boobs, and sculpted the cleavage. After that, I removed her head and soaked it in some scalding hot water from the microwave to soften up the hair so that I could remove it. I did this so that it would be easier for me to paint the leafy green detail above her eyebrows. I painted the green detail above her eyebrows partly as an homage to Uma Thurman. Again, that Batman and Robin movie sucked, but Uma Thurman was sexy as hell as Poison Ivy. The other reason I did it was to differentiate her from some other figures in my collection that have the same head sculpt, like this Marvel Legends Black Widow and this custom Oracle figure that I made from a Toys R Us exclusive Mary Jane Watson figure. I used the thinner vine accessories for Poison Ivy's laurel crown and the bracelets, and I dry brushed them with a lighter shade of green to bring out some of the sculpted details. So I painted her hair brighter red, and since I sculpted over her thigh swivels, I had to repaint her legs. I chose this brighter shade of green. But the best part about using the Polaris figure as a base body is that all the pins and her points of articulation were already cast in the appropriate color plastic. So I didn't have to go through the process of taking the figure apart, sanding down all of her joints, repainting all of her joints, and then putting them back together. And paint rub will never be an issue. If you're familiar with the articulation of a modern Marvel Legends figure, this is all pretty standard stuff. She has a ball-hinged neck, it goes forward and back like that, side to side, restricted a little bit by the hair, which is common with a lot of female action figures. She's got disc hinge shoulders, they go about this far up, they spin all the way around. She's got disc hinge elbows that go about this far. She's got disc hinge wrists that pivot back and forth, as well as swivel. She's got a really nice diaphragm joint that goes about this far forward, really far back, pivots from side to side, and you can twist it a little bit there too. Her hips kick out this far forward, about this far back, and out to the side about this much. She had a thigh swivel joint right about here, but I absolutely hate those joints. I think they break up the sculpt way too much, so I covered over that with Milliput epoxy, and I sanded it down so it was smooth to get rid of that joint. Now I'm probably going to catch hell for this, but I hate this mid-thigh swivel joint all across the board. The DC and Marvel figures. It's ugly, I never use it, and I don't even understand what the purpose is. Are you really going to pose your action figure like this so you can see that big cut right there? It's awful. And they put it right in the middle of this muscle group on the majority of DC Universe and DC Multiverse figures. This is indicative of most of Mattel action figures. Now, it's not as bad on most Marvel figures because they put the swivel joint up here closer to the hip. It's not as bad with a lot of female and teenage characters because they're less muscular right here. But with the muscular characters like this Wolverine here, it's really apparent. Like I said, I don't understand why on earth you would pose your action figure like this. It looks terrible and it serves no function as far as I'm concerned. This Marvel Legends Spider-Man figure has ball socket hips. And I love this joint because it's not as noticeable and you get the same range of motion out of this joint right here that you'd get out of a thigh swivel joint. Now I could see someone complaining about having this gap right here in the crotch, but is it really any worse than having this gap right here? I really wish that this was an across-the-board piece of articulation from Marvel Legends, and I wish they would omit this thigh swivel entirely. Alright, so I apologize for that rant there. Let's get back to this Poison Ivy custom. So like I said, I got rid of that hideous thigh swivel joint. She's got double jointed knees. Move about this far back. And I tried to be real careful when I glued these leaves onto the side of her leg here so the super glue wouldn't gum up the joint and the leaves don't get in the way of any of her articulation. She has an ankle joint that allows her to point and flex her foot, and she has an ankle rocker joint with a forward-facing pin, which is standard with all Marvel Legends figures. And if you haven't already, I suggest searching YouTube for the DC Multiverse panel from San Diego Comic-Con 2018. Because in their panel, the designers said that they will be including ankle rocker joints on all the DC Multiverse figures, starting with the armored-up Lex Luthor Build-A-Figure wave. So it seems like Mattel is finally listening to their customers, like me, who have been harping on them for years about adding ankle rocker joints. That will make it possible to get your DC Multiverse figures into more dynamic poses like this for photos and displays. I couldn't be happier about it unless they'd added ankle rockers years and years ago. So let's kick off the figure comparisons with some of my favorite Batman action figures. First we have the Mattel DC Multiverse Superpowers Batman with a cloth cape. Then we have the Batman Unlimited New 52 Batman in the metallic paint scheme. And finally we have the Mattel DC Superheroes Batman in the blue and gray costume from a 2-pack with Batgirl. Here she is next to the DC Collectibles New 52 Greg Capullo Batman figure and the DC Collectibles Icons Afterbirth Batman. Here she is compared to the other Poison Ivy figures that I have in my collection. First off is the DC Collectibles Bombshells Poison Ivy. Then we have a Mattel Poison Ivy figure in the DC Universe style. And that one actually came from the Matty Collector Club Infinite Earth subscription series. And then finally we have a New 52 version of Poison Ivy from the DC Collectibles Supervillains line. I was really never happy with this Mattel Poison Ivy figure. There's really only two cool things about her. They did a really good job on her hair, and she came with some nice leafy vine accessories that you can wrap around her arms and her legs. I think the green chlorophyll skin tone is cool, but if I had to choose between this and a classic version with the regular Caucasian flesh tone, I would pick the classic version. Poison Ivy is not known to be a physical fighter, but for some reason, this Mattel figure has clenched fists. Her diaphragm joint doesn't move at all, and her hip joints are really flimsy. I've had her standing in a neutral pose like this in one of my DTOF cabinets for about 3 years. One day while I was rearranging my figures, I noticed that her right leg has become extremely loose, like it's just hanging on by a thread. This figure is just generally disappointing. This Matty Collector Poison Ivy figure was my go-to Poison Ivy figure for quite some time. But that's only because she was the closest thing that I had to a classic Poison Ivy figure. Now that I have this new custom, I think this old Matty Collector version is probably just going to go into a plastic tub in the closet somewhere, because I doubt I can get any money on Evil Bay for an old, outdated figure that's missing her accessories and has a busted leg. Here's Ivy compared to some Harley Quinn figures in my collection. There's the DC Collectibles Roller Derby Harley. There's the DC Icons Harley Quinn. There's the DC Universe Classics Harley Quinn figure by Mattel. That's the one from the Mad Love 2-pack that doesn't have the blue tint to her face. And then finally is a DC Collectibles Arkham Knight Harley Quinn. And I think she scales best with a DC Universe Classics Harley Quinn. Here's my custom Poison Ivy with some other members of Batman's Rogues Gallery. On the far left is a custom Two-Face figure, and we have a Golden Age Catwoman, a custom Scarecrow, Silver Age or Bronze Age Penguin, we have a classic Joker, Harley Quinn in her original costume, there's a classic Riddler, and there's a custom Mr. Freeze figure that I repainted to imitate the color scheme of his costume in the animated series.
And it's ladies' night here in the collection room, where ladies drink for free. The drinks are cold, and the music is hot.
I'm sorry, I've been running a fever the last couple days on top of the heavy drinking. Alright, so from left to right, we have the DC Universe Classics Wonder Woman, ready to cockblock any dudes that happen to come this way. There's the DC-UC Power Girl. This is Katana. She's got my back. I would advise not being killed by her. Her sword steals the souls of its victims. DC Universe Classics Black Canary. DC-UC Harley Quinn. There's a custom 90s era or Jim Ballant Catwoman figure that I made out of the Green Lantern Classics Star Sapphire. There's a DC Multiverse Batwoman. There's a DC-UC Zatanna. There's a DC Superheroes Batgirl who knows the same amount of dance moves that I do. Then we have Fire and Ice from the Matty Collector DC Club Infinite Earths Signature Series subscription. Then we have the DC Collectibles New 52 Huntress figure. And I almost forgot, but here she is with Val Kilmer Batman. And now you'll have seals stuck in your head for the rest of the day. You're welcome. Alright, I think that about wraps it up. I hope you found this video entertaining and informative. Maybe you'll be inspired to make your own custom classic Poison Ivy figure. I had a lot of fun putting mine together, and I'm thrilled to finally have what I consider the definitive Poison Ivy figure for my Batman Rogues Gallery. I'd really appreciate it if you'd like this video and share it with your friends, leave a comment down below, and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future. You can visit the Toy Ark website for up-to-date news and friendly chat about toys and action figures, and make sure to follow Lowan Bing on Instagram. Again, I'd like to thank Lowan Bing or Botef for inspiring this Poison Ivy custom. I kind of kick myself for not coming up with it on my own. So I think that's about all for me today. Until next time, take care, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.